Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Wholehearted Leadership podcast. And today I'm very excited to have with me my friend Nicole Golioso. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Very good.
Welcome, Nicole. So let me first of all introduce Nicole a little. So Nicole is a HR and DE&I leader who advocates for inclusive leadership and mental health. She's also a beetle collector. Okay, hang on a minute. In case you're wondering,
Not the insects.
yeah, in case you're wondering, she has a room full of bugs. That will be interesting though. But she's also not really like collecting like records, vinyl records of the Beatles. But she collects a Volkswagen Beetle die-cast model car collection. And she currently has like over 300 of them.
Yeah.
Wow. And she actually has a vision of being in the Guinness Book of Records for having the biggest collection of Volkswagen Beetles. In fact,
Hopefully.
Volkswagen should actually get a hang of this podcast episode and make you their brand ambassador.
I hope so.
Do you
They
own
did
one?
feature me, like Volkswagen Philippines did feature me years ago when the collection was just small.
Oh.
But not like, I think I only had like less than 100 at that time. But now, maybe they can.
They should, actually. They should. Right? And Volkswagen Global should actually feature you. Right. So let's talk about wholehearted leadership, right? It's like our first question that we typically ask our guests is, what does being a wholehearted leader mean to you?
I think for me, being a wholehearted leader is you being genuine with what you want to give to the people. It's really, I do talk a lot about inclusive leadership, and I think it's greatly connected to wholehearted leadership, wherein you take into account different types of people and deal with them or approach them with empathy and respect. I think that for me is wholehearted leadership.
I think that's so important, right? I think it's about making people feel a sense of belonging and welcome, that they can be safe to be themselves, right? So I think that's what it means to be an inclusive leader as well.
Yeah.
Right? That's so important. That's so important. I think you talk about empathy, right? I think we can dive into that a little later. So, if it's so important, what are some of the obstacles to leaders leading wholeheartedly at work?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I think number one would always be the needs of the business, right? Because most of your leaders would have the pressure to be able to deliver, I think, like in profit, revenues, really manage the team operationally. Sometimes we tend to forget that we're actually dealing with people, and you need to take into account what the people feel, what the people think about. And it's not because, a lot of leaders are heartless. I don't think so. I think it's really more of what do we want to prioritize? Do we want to prioritize business or do we want to prioritize people? I think that's one. And maybe second, a lot of leaders can also be misunderstood, if I will be frank about it. When people don't have the kind of relationship with leaders wherein they're comfortable with talking to them also and getting to know them, they get stuck into this impression that, oh, this person is just like hardballing me, or this person is not within my league. But if they also make an effort to get to know our leaders, I mean, they are also human after all. You'd be surprised with how much of their personalities can people relate to as well.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important topic as well. I think I know you through LinkedIn, right? It's like I connected with your LinkedIn posts. I really like the wholehearted nature of your stories, which we shall get into in a moment's time. But I really like how you are willing to put yourself out there and being so authentic and being so vulnerable, right? But on talking about LinkedIn, I think recently there's also a lot of conversation about toxic leadership, right? It's almost like an echo chamber. Everyone's talking about toxic leadership. Sometimes I almost feel like it's putting I'm not disclaiming that there are no bad leadership. There are
Yeah.
really some bad leadership out there. There's a lot of like bullying that's happening in the workplace. But sometimes I think the over-indexing of toxic leadership puts the blame on leadership. And that's not fair.
Yeah.
I think also people themselves need to also play their own part in being inclusive. Like what you just said, right? It's like if you think the leader is beyond your league, you think the leader is somebody that's aloof that you don't want to talk to, you are also not being an inclusive employee.
Yeah.
You're not being an inclusive team member, right? So there's almost a form of kind of a reverse exclusion here, right? You're excluding your leader from the conversation. You're having certain projections of who your leader is, right? I think employees also on their part need to also ask themselves this question: have I done my best to be included?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point, because I think what we forget, right, when we talk about DEI, we put the responsibility so much on HR and management. If things are not working, they're the easiest people to blame.
Yeah.
They're not doing a lot, or they're not listening to us. But people also forget or take for granted that when we talk about DEI, it is a shared responsibility. For it to work,
Yep.
everyone needs to be part of it. It doesn't even have to be always tagged towards your programs or your company benefits. Even the day-to-day actions
Yes.
that we do, how we talk to our colleagues, how we deal with our work, those are things within our control that we also need to be mindful of. So it doesn't always have to be, oh, it's a leadership thing. It's not working. You mentioned earlier that toxic leadership, yes, that's part of it, but it's not something that I think we are also blinded by. It happens. It's part of reality.
Yeah.
But we can also be toxic people.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's also about reframing. When you talk so much or focus so much on the negative things, then you attract more negativity
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
It's you adding stress to yourself when you focus so much on the negatives, looking for faults with everybody, with everything that's going on, when you can focus on things that you're good at, things that you can improve on, things that you should be grateful for.
Yeah. And things that you can also add to it, right? It's like I was listening to Adam Grant's podcast recently, and he had this fascinating conversation about how culture fit is overrated, right? Sometimes when we hire people, we look for culture fit. But what actually happens when you're looking for culture fit is like you're saying, hey, this is a culture we have here. This is what it is. And then we have a certain mold, we have a certain shape of a person that will be the right jigsaw puzzle fit into this culture.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is that you are already having a form of confirmation bias. You're already kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like hiring people that has a culture fit.
Yeah.
But what happens is you're actually perpetuating groupthink. You are just like perpetuating people who all think the same, talk the same, look the same.
Yeah.
No, that's actually not very, very useful for diversity, right? It's like it's not useful for businesses as well.
Yeah.
Right? You don't get a diversity of thought, you don't get a breadth of thinking. And so I think the guest on that particular podcast said something like, I don't hire for culture fit, I hire for culture add. ADD, add. Like, what do you add to the culture? What do you bring to the table? How do you add to it? How do you actually contribute to it? Like, so I just wanted to bring that point up, and I said, what do you think about that?
No, I think it is a valid point. While there's still merit to thinking about like culture fit as to not disrupt everything completely, right? I think it is valid that we also think about how thinking about culture fit also affects or influences our biases.
Yeah.
If there's anything that I would probably focus more on than culture fit, it's more of the alignment of your values with the organization. Because I'm a firm believer that if your values as a person is not aligned with the values of the organization, no matter how good the company is, no matter how much they give you, you will probably dread going to work eventually because the things that are being done or the approach is not resonating well with you. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, it's more really make sure that you have similar values. Maybe not 100% because I think that's impossible
Yeah.
too, right? But it's really more of like the core values that you want to prioritize, if that's something that is important also to your company.
You brought a very good point, right? Values. But let me ask you this question. Let's unpack this a little.
Mm.
How do you know if your values and the company's values are aligned? Not alike, but rather aligned. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah.
It takes a great deal of self-awareness.
Hmm.
I don't think it's something that you can just, write or answer overnight.
Mm-mm.
Because our values can be a lot of things. A lot of things can be important to you. So for me, why I know what my values are is I've spent years really reflecting on the kind of person that I am, and really reflecting on the things that are important in my life.
Mm.
So some of the values that I hold very dearly, I mean, apart from inclusion, is really respect and authenticity, as well as kindness to everyone, regardless of their background. For
Mhm.
me, those are things that are important to me. It can be different for other people. So it's really more evaluating our day-to-day experiences also. Also learning more maybe before you join a company even, or when you've already joined a certain organization. Also try to get to know the perspectives of people. What values do the company stand for? Even asking your leader that, what values are most important to you and why? And
Mm.
then you try to reflect. You don't have to agree to everything that they will be saying,
Yeah.
but it's more of, oh yeah, I agree with that, or that resonates with me. That is important to me as well. Then maybe there's something that we can collaborate more on in the coming days or in the coming years.
Nice.
So a lot of like self-awareness really, and it is an ongoing journey that we all have to focus on.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think when you talk about this, right, the one thing that came to my mind is values is something that's often talked about,
Mm.
but there's also a distinction between espoused values and lived values.
Mm.
What do I mean by that? Espoused values are like the values you put on the company wall,
Yeah.
right? The kind of values that you say, hey, these are our values, these are our core values, these are the values we live by.
Yeah.
But that's what you say, right? But that's espoused. You are just
Mm.
espousing it. But I think what you actually look out for is lived values,
Mm.
right? It's like, how are you able to then live your values that you say are
Yeah.
important to you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
How do you live that values through your decisions,
Mm.
through your choices and the things you say,
Yeah.
right? I think so. What you just mentioned, it is very powerful. It's like when you have a chance to meet a leader, you don't just think you're going for interview,
Mm.
right? Like say a job interview. You are also actually interviewing your future manager.
Yeah.
You are interviewing the person for whether this is a person you want to work with
Yeah.
and for, right? So I think asking questions around stories around like how do you actually live these values, right?
Mm.
Stories actually can show a person's values.
Yeah.
As the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I believe that stories actually are worth 1,000 values.
Mm. And I've had a lot of candidates, which I actually appreciate it when they ask me, "Oh, how long have you been with your company, and why have you stayed that long?" It's a question that can speak 1,000 words, really. And like the answer of the person, you would know if it's canned or if it's not as genuine, right? So that gives you additional insight if
Yep.
that company is for you.
That's so powerful, right? So that's values. So how do you actually tell a person whether they are actually living those values they say are their core values? How do you tell?
How do you tell? That's a very hard question to answer, right? I don't think, unless they're doing something completely against the values that they say, I don't think anyone at least might be in the right position to say that, unless
Yep.
you you have the relationship to give feedback to the person, or if the person is also open to getting feedback.
Yes.
So maybe we don't have to be too academic that, oh, this is the value that you said is important to you, but I've seen you do this, or I've seen you do that, or that's not the meaning of that value and stuff like that, right? But it's really more of when we approach people, when we give feedback, even you can ask the question, oh, what are the values that are important to you? Even with check in with your direct reports, I'm in HR and I do check in with our people also from across departments, right? So I also ask them, what's important to you? What are the goals that you are trying to achieve professionally and personally? And then, when they start talking also, and they also ask me, or sometimes if I feel that there is a need for me to give them feedback that they might have a blind spot on,
Yeah.
then I take that opportunity. I give them very constructive feedback, whether it's positive or negative, right? Like saying that, oh, I understand that this is something that you want to show, and this is something that's valuable to you, but just out of observation or what I have heard also from the people that you work with, these are the impressions that you may be showing that you might not be aware of. So it's really more of allowing them to reflect also. You don't have to impose on what's right and what's wrong. We are mostly adults after all. So it's really allowing people, or asking questions even that are open-ended, that would make them think, oh, am I not living up to the values that I said I want to show?
I love it. Just by your sharing, right, showcases that you are living your values, right? Because you are giving them the respect.
Yeah.
Because one of your value is respect, right? You're giving them the respect to value the agencies. Like, this is what I observed, this is what I saw. But you're giving them the respect, giving them the opportunity to reflect upon what they actually, whether it is indeed a blind spot that they can reflect upon and change, instead of like being very, very like directive and say, hey, this is what I saw, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to change.
Yeah.
So you're giving them the respect. And then, of course, you're also inviting authenticity, because, very often authenticity is about when your work can match your talk. So, for example, if they say that their value is transparency, but, for example, they withhold certain information at a team meeting because they didn't want to give away their ideas, they're afraid that people will steal their ideas, then that itself, right, is like, okay, here's a blind spot, right? It's like you value transparency, but you're not being transparent.
Yeah.
So you're giving feedback not based on a kind of value judgment by saying, oh no, by withholding, you are a liar, you're not a good person. But you're not saying that. What you're saying is that you articulated that your value is transparency, but that action wasn't being transparent. So that itself is easier for people to digest.
Yeah.
And I think that's very powerful, because you're actually also living up to your own value as of authenticity.
And I think we also have to give people a benefit of the doubt sometimes, instead of just simply jumping into the conclusion, because there are times, and this has happened to me also in the past, wherein a certain action didn't have the same intent as what eventually came out to be, that it impacted other people. And, I was judged for it, crucified for it almost. And, it was something that left a big chip on my shoulder in the past. And I think, it was not out of ill intent. It was sometimes like people actually make mistakes, and it's more of how do we also embrace those mistakes and learn from it, right? So all of us are not perfect. And I think we just have to keep that in mind. Of course, it's a different story if, you've given someone constructive feedback, and they still don't do anything about it, then maybe that's a different story. But if it's a mistake that that has just happened, maybe it's also up to us to understand why did it happen and see it from the perspective of the person first without jumping into conclusions.
Yeah, I think jumping to conclusions is also a function of our impatience, also a function of our need to, also a function of our unconscious bias.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think a big part of D&I is also this idea of unconscious bias, right? It's like we have certain bias upon some people, and then we then have confirmation bias. We only look for evidences to prove like that our bias is correct, right? Like what I said earlier on, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Cool. I want to just change track a little since you talk about some of your past experiences. I think we have spoke about this in the past before as well. I was particularly drawn to how you mentioned that you actually were in some cases of attempting suicide, right? So I thought it was very extremely brave of you to come out on social media and share this so openly. And I thought, what a brave lady, what a brave woman.
Thank you.
So maybe I'd like to just like touch a little about your own, the whole genesis of it, right? How did it led to the point where you were there to like wanting to commit suicide? Like how was it like for you growing up? Yeah, where did you grow up? And tell us a little bit more about the background.
Yeah. So I actually started my mental health challenges when I was 14. And it's a moment when I didn't have an understanding of what depression is. I didn't know what I was feeling. I also didn't know how to talk about it. I grew up in an environment where I felt like I had to be perfect all the time. I had to be the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect everything. And, showing any signs of weakness or any sign of imperfection was not something I was open to. So when I was 14, I found out something about my family that completely distraught me. I will not go into the details as to why, because my mom will probably
I respect you for that, yeah.
not be happy if I share that openly. But, when I found out about this on my own, I think the idea that I had of perfection really just got swept away. Because growing up, I mean, I want to recognize that I did come from a privileged background, I would say. And I also had a very, very loving family also. My parents were present, even, all types of extracurricular activities, they were present. And I didn't really have anything to complain about if I would think about it at that time, right? And even our friends would say that, oh, we envy your family because you're like a model family. You're always complete, you're traveling together, etc. So in my head, yes, I do have a perfect life. But when I found out this incident, all that just got erased. I started questioning myself. Were the truths that I knew at that time not entirely true at the end of the day? And that was when I was 14, that was my first suicide attempt. And it was my sister, who was actually 3 years younger than me, who saw me hurting myself. And I'm very, very thankful to my sister, because despite the young age, she had the presence of mind to do something about it. She hid everything I can use in the house to hurt myself. She called my best friend at that time to ask for help, and just stayed with me throughout that period, even if she didn't know what was really happening at that time. So I think that is what triggered it. But over the years, my parents did not know about it. And I kept that all to myself. And for 12, 13 years, I was struggling on my own. And, every day, despite having a good day, I would go to bed and pray that I don't wake up the next morning. And I remember being so mad at the world that when I wake up the next morning, I'm like, why am I still alive? And, and I had that when I was in my early teenage years. I didn't know how to explain that big weight on your chest. But I went on. I think I covered up that imperfection. I covered up what I was going through by achieving a lot of things. I was a high performer, high achiever in school, in my extracurricular. Like I said, I had to be like the perfect everything. But I think the turning point of my life happened when I was about 24, 25. I left my first job to move to the US and just try out something new. I mean, as someone who was young, I wanted to challenge myself more too. And living in LA, I had the opportunity to be independent, to do things all on my own, and to live in an environment where not a lot of people know me. I didn't have the image that I had, whether it was in my family or my educational background, etc. And it was so refreshing and empowering for me that I was a nobody. Not a lot of people would probably want that. Why would you want to be a nobody? But for me at that time, it was the best time that I had. So I thought that I was already like transitioning very, very well. But, for almost a year, I was doing okay until something happened that forced me to go back to the Philippines. So I thought that I will just be back for about a week or two, but I had to stay longer than that. And I think that is what eventually became my ground zero, the lowest point of my life. Because at the time when I thought that things were already picking up for me, that I'm powering through everything already, everything was just taken away from me. And at that time, I didn't know how to get myself back up. When I left the Philippines when I was like 24, I was in HR. And then I went into marketing. And then, like, at the time, like, I don't know, like, would I apply for HR roles again? What would people say? And I, like, when people see me, everyone's asking, oh, why are you here? And it was so dreadful to be answering those questions, that for, I think, almost a month, I was not getting out of my room. I was just like crying nonstop all day, barely eating. And I remember December 31st of 2017, I couldn't take it anymore. And I thought that the only way to end my pain was to end my life, because it was just like a dark, dark space for me. So while everybody was celebrating for New Year's Eve, I was in my room and I was about to overdose. And at that time, like when people tell you that if you're at the brink of death, your whole life will flash before your eyes in a matter of seconds. That happened to me. And I was fully decided at that time. It was not just about hurting myself anymore. I was fully decided that today will be my last day. But when I was about to swallow those pills that I had in my hand, I heard a voice that I still couldn't explain to this day, saying over and over, Nicole, you shouldn't end your life, because if you do, the people you've helped before will give up too. And I just started breaking down. I don't know where the voice was coming from, but even when I was struggling for over a decade on my own, I was helping other people. I was saving, in a way, the lives of my students, my friends who may be going through something as well. And a lot of them, even until now, I would get random messages from people that, I'm alive because of you. And I think when that voice made me realize that, it made me think that if it was just me, I wouldn't have cared. But I couldn't have it in my conscience, even in the afterlife, on how much influence that can have on other people. If someone that they were looking up to would give up, then why should they live? And I didn't want that. So, after that, it wasn't an overnight thing. While I said that I will not think about ending my life ever again, it took me more than a year to actually be able to say that I was healed. And every day from that New Year's Eve up to maybe like 14 months after, every day my prayer would be, Lord, I don't know why this is happening to me. I don't know the answers to all my questions, but I hope you give me the answer soon because I just want the pain to go away. And for more than a year, I thought nothing was happening. But, I think February of 2019, I just got a new job at that time. I woke up one day and for the first time in over 13 years, I was able to say that the pain was gone. And I realized that throughout that year, when I thought nothing was happening, little by little, my pain was being taken out from me. So, yeah, and I think, that really turned things around for me. Whenever I look back, if I gave up at that time, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't even have the voice to share my story that could help people from around the world. I know that's a very, very long story, but I think that's the core of it all. I am the leader that I am today. I am the person that I am today because of that.
Thank you for sharing. That's so beautiful. Like, I'm tearing also. I thought that was so descriptive, so vivid. I think you said you're carrying this pain for so long.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask about the pain, but if you were to put a label on it, I don't want to go into the details of the pain because I don't want to bring you back there again. But if you were to put a label on it, what was the pain about?
The physical pain.
Was it physical or was it an emotional thing?
I think it became both. It started as an emotional pain, but it eventually translated into physical pain. If I would describe the physical pain, it's probably like having a heart attack every day, wherein you have like a tightening of your chest. It's hard to explain, like, really, but it's also a lot of mental battle, right? When you're going through depression or any type of mental illness, you're not really fighting against anybody. It's yourself that you're fighting with, which is even more difficult because you're also the one who can actually answer what you are going through, and that's not easy. And that's why we go into therapy and all that, right? And actually for me, it was probably towards the tail end of that battle that I asked for help. Even when I was taking psychology in college, I didn't really have that courage to ask for help and to admit what was not really wrong with me, but what I was going through.
You said something about fighting yourself, right? What were you fighting for?
fighting for maybe acceptance of my own self.
Okay.
Acceptance that I'm not perfect.
Ah,
Um, that may sound like a cliche for some people, but to me, it was hard
mm,
to accept that I cannot control everything. That not it's not every day that it would be rainbows and butterflies, and because I didn't know what failure actually looked like until I was in my early 20s.
wow.
And I was maybe sheltered in a lot of ways from the pain. Like, even the pain that I was going through when I was 14, I didn't want to think of it as a failure at that
Mm,
time. So that resilience was also quite
mm.
low for a long time because it was not something I was ever prepared for.
I think there's a lot of things here. I mean, I don't mean to project, but
Yeah.
if I can read between the lines and what actually came up for me as I'm listening to you, is two things. I think one of the thing is when you were 14, you mentioned it was a family issue
Mm.
that you were having to confront with, and probably you are not mature enough
Yeah.
to process that. And one of the common things I realized based on my conversations with people that I train, I coach, I teach, very often children or young people without the emotional capacity to deal with the pain would tend to internalize.
Mm.
And the psychological term is introjection.
Yeah.
So it's like children will typically kind of like blame themselves for their parents' issues,
Yeah.
blame themselves for the family issues, when it's actually not your fault.
Yeah.
But then obviously it's because the pain is so painful that you're almost tempted to think, oh no, if only I was a better girl, if only I was
Yeah.
a more obedient child, if only I did better in school, then my family wouldn't be having the problem that they're having,
Yeah.
right? So there's a fair bit of introjection over there, and then so it's almost like you're the barrier, you're
Yeah.
the carrier of the pain and the burden of your parents.
Yeah.
So that's the first piece. The second piece, right, around that is the image that came to me is you talk about your life was being perfect. You get to travel. You have a
Mm.
very loving family, very present parents. They were there for you in all your CCA, your extracurricular activities, and
Mm.
all. And then that something happened, right? That kind of like shattered the image,
Yeah.
the vision. So the image that come to me is this idea of lost paradise,
Mm.
right? There was this state of blissfulness, state of
Yeah.
happiness, state of paradise, and then suddenly you're almost like casted out of that. It's almost like that paradise was just a beautiful dream. It didn't existed,
Yeah.
and you're casted out into the wild, into the danger, and having to fend for yourself.
Yeah.
And so that desire to return back to that paradise, and coupled with the first point I mentioned about maybe you introjecting
Yeah.
or blaming yourself for what happened, I think that is a double whammy, right? It's a double bind, double whammy, right?
Yeah.
So you almost feel like I want to go back to that moment of blissfulness, but I don't deserve to go back there because of how messed up I am as a person, because of how unworthy I am as a person, and having to carry all of those emotions sounds like it's a double whammy. I don't know if I captured what you said correctly.
No, I think that's quite accurate, right? It was not something I could really verbalize in the past, but now that I know better, I'm in a better position in my life to really reflect on everything that has happened through the years. I think that a lot of what you said is true. I blamed myself a lot of like for everything that has happened. I don't know why also, but I think it was a natural reaction, right? It was, like it was you questioning, oh yeah, like exactly what you said, like could I have done better, or will we have not will we not um have that kind of experience if I was just as perfect as I thought I was.
Yeah. So that perfect paradise that you had was broken. The image was broken,
Yeah.
and you're longing for that paradise to come back.
Yeah.
But it's almost like the glass has been shattered. Even if you were to put it back together,
Yeah.
kintsugi and all that, right? It's like it looks more beautiful, but still, at a point in time, you didn't have that ability to process that,
Yeah.
and it almost feels like it's an image that's broken forever.
Yeah.
So like a part of you died of sorts in a moment.
In a way. Yeah.
I mean, I can relate to that because I've gone through moments like that
Yeah.
as well, and I can relate to. So I was relating to you, resonating with you so much when you're talking about that pain, and I thank you for bringing that on this podcast, because recently there was World Suicide Prevention Month.
Yes.
And I wrote another a piece on LinkedIn around how we often misunderstand suicide. We think that people are wanting to commit suicide because they are wanting to escape pain, or they want to escape, or they're taking the easy way out, or people think that, oh no, they are wanting to commit suicide because they are very sad, or they are they are very depressed. I think it's more than just that. It's really like an absence of hope, and at the same time also a form of self-blame, self-rejection.
Yeah.
That you would reject yourself, right? That you think people say, oh no, how can you die? Don't you think about your parents? Don't you think about people? But if you think that you are at fault, you are to blame for what happened, then you will be saying that I should die because like then my parents wouldn't have to go through this pain, or whatever people around me would have go through pain if I because I'm the one to blame.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very, very big piece over there.
Yeah, and you know what's very hard over the years, especially when it was just fresh, when I just started talking about it. But even until now, I still get it. You know, people asking you, why were you depressed? Or, it's not something that other people still believe in to this day.
Yeah.
They feel like, oh, during our time, there's no such thing as depression or anxiety. It's just your generation's problem. But I don't think so. I do believe, like, I mean, your background is also in psychology, right? Like, if mental health issues did not exist long before I was alive, we wouldn't have a DSM-5 talking about mental health. It's just that now it's more openly talked about because we do have the platforms to talk about it publicly. We do have social media where every piece of information is cascaded very, very quickly and openly. So, it makes me feel bad when people still tell me that, oh, other people have worse problems than you do. You don't have the reason to feel that way, which I think is wrong, because even people who are coming from what others would say a privileged background, maybe they have other types of problems that we don't typically see, that we need to also understand. So yeah, like, and I think that's why I also talk a lot about mental health and to shed that awareness.
Yes.
Because many will still not understand. And the more that we talk about it, the more we are comfortable with sharing real life stories from real people, the more that I hope people will empathize and understand better.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people say those things to you, right, either they could say out of goodwill, maybe they just want you to be better, but they're coming from a space of problem solving. But they don't even understand what the problem is, right? So they don't have the in-depth understanding of the problem. How can they go into problem solving, right? So I think sometimes we move too fast into solutioning when I think the world just needs to take a pause. My friend and one of our previous podcast guests, Rob Volpe from the US, he's from San Francisco, and he wrote the book on empathy, right? It's like he called himself an empathy and activist, and he said something about taking an empathetic pause, right? Just pause for a moment and tune into the other person instead of just saying, go into problem solving mode or trying to say, hey, why are you so depressed? Why are you so sad, right? You're it's not the worst. Think about the starving African kids.
Yeah.
And then you should feel better straight away.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, now that's actually very shaming because you're actually making people feel even worse. Right? You're making people feel wrong for feeling depressed.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're actually adding on a secondary and tertiary layer to it. I think it's important to I think the word is to honor everyone's experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone has the right to their own experiences and has the right to their own narratives. Of course, we can help them to reframe their narratives, but that comes with a lot more understanding, empathy, and guidance, counseling, coaching, therapy. It does take a lot of that as well.
There are actually 2 LinkedIn posts that I shared connected to that. I think number 1 was I was sharing about how as an HR leader, I get a lot of meetings for crying sessions. It's not something you hear often, but I do get that a lot. It can be a formal calendar invite. Sometimes I just would have like people bursting into my office just to cry. And for many people, when that happens, our knee-jerk reaction is to give an advice.
Yep.
But many times, the most that we need to do is to just listen.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be reactive all the time. Many people, when we are in distress, we just need to vent everything out and be with someone who would listen to us without any sort of judgment. And as human beings, that's very important. It's a fundamental skill, active listening at that, which we all need to develop. It may seem basic for a lot of people, but in reality, many of us are not good at it. Like you said, we focus too much on problem solving. We want everything quick. And we forget the essence of why people are looking for certain types of connections. And the second one, apart from the crying session, I was just also sharing that we need to develop the skill for having the art of asking different types of questions. So asking questions that are open-ended. When people come to you, don't just give an advice. Maybe you can ask people questions that would allow them to reflect. Because again, many of us already have the answers. We just need a third person's point of view to process those answers to make sense of things.
Yeah.
So asking open-ended and non-judgmental questions become very, very important also.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this whole idea about giving people that space, right? I think something that we actually don't talk a lot about is safety. Of course, Amy Edmondson talks a lot about psychological safety.
Yeah.
And psychological safety is something that's been talked a lot about recently. But I think we don't just think about psychological safety as in, the leader must provide psychological safety, right? The company must provide a psychologically safe culture for us to speak up. But I think psychological safety is also everyone's responsibility. Like you said, right? D&I is everyone's responsibility.
Yeah.
I think psychological safety is also asking ourselves, right? What are our what are our safety thermostats? Right, we need to know like what are some of the things that engenders lack of safety.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes from, to your point earlier on about self-awareness. It's like going through your own past experiences, your own trauma.
Yeah.
So whenever something happened in the past that caused us trauma, our body, our brain, specifically the amygdala, memorizes and remember that particular event, that inciting event. And we remember the pain and the emotional response that we had about that. And so what happens is that amygdala then codes that as a form of a lack of safety.
Yeah.
There's danger, right? There was a point you said something about wanting to come back to connection. When we are in connection, just like when we are in our mother's womb, we are safe.
Yeah.
When we are hugged, like, there's a study about babies, right? It's like when a group of babies were fed, clothed, given milk, but they were not hugged and spoken to. Another group of babies were clothed, given milk, fed, but was hugged and spoken to regularly. The group that was left alone, they were not hugged, they were not spoken to, they actually need to be put on life support. I don't know, within a very short time, like 2-3 days. It just shows that fundamentally we want connection, we want relationships.
Yeah.
So to be alone is very scary. And also about workplace stresses nowadays. And being alone without anybody to actually confide in, it can be extremely fearful. It's extremely dangerous. Right? The world can be a very dangerous place where you're feeling alone and no one to fend for you. So what happens is that when we are experiencing lack of safety, we are in a very emotionally dysregulated state.
Yeah.
Like we go into fright, fight or flight. Right? Our nervous system is triggered. It's kind of like activated.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's why we are all wanting to problem solve. Because if we problem solve, the problem goes away, then but I think we need to really stop trying to problem solve.
Yeah.
And just take an empathetic pause, listen to people, and let people vent and talk and be in connection, as you said. Because that's when you actually co-regulate with the person so that you bring them down into a sense of safety. Like, oh, I'm safe here.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's such a deep wisdom that, like, I think we both need to really talk a lot more about in terms of bringing this into the workplace.
Yeah.
I think this is something maybe we can even collaborate and work together on something like that, because I'm passionate about trauma-informed leadership.
Yeah.
So how would you say your past experiences that we have gone so much into, how does it shape your approach to D&I and your advocacy today?
I think it's really because when I was going through my mental health challenges, I didn't have that safe space that you were like talking about to open up to people, to ask for help. And I think now that I'm in a leadership role, I do what I can to be able to provide that safe space to the people that I serve. Whether that's just being a friend to them in the office or protecting them in whatever way I can, I do that. Or even really recommending resources for them or professional help for them in various aspects of their life, not just with mental health, but in other things. And I think because for me, I lived because of my purpose, which is to help people. And again, the kind of leader that I am now, everything that I do on a professional and personal basis is all geared towards that. How am I able to help people? In my own little ways, I'm not the richest person. I'm also not the most capable person in the room. Like I said, I have my imperfections too. I'm not the best at everything, but with whatever strength I have, I use that and maximize that to help people grow, to help people live a more meaningful life.
It's beautiful. I think in our previous conversation, we did have a very interesting conversation, which I never had before with anybody, around the distinction between, around the topic of courage. Right? You did mention that there were times in your life when you didn't have courage, but you needed to summon the courage in order to push through the day and push through to where you are today.
Yeah.
But today I see that you lived with courage. So it's no longer a summoned courage, it's a lived courage. Just now we talk about espoused value versus lived values. I really do think that right now you are not just operating from a place of summoning courage, but you're really living courage. You're living proof of that. Right? How were you able to be on this journey of developing such courage in yourself
Mm.
from healing from those very low moments to where you are today, which is who is such a thriving human being, flourishing human
Mm.
being.
I think because it helped a lot when I started talking about my story in even a much smaller audience that I have now. When I started talking about it and like people approaching me as to how my story has been helping them, I think that gave me that courage and power to talk more about it. It's not an easy conversation, nor is it an easy story to relive. But I think of it as like, this is really my purpose in life. I survived to be able to do this. I've experienced how it was like to be at the rock bottom. So now I'm living my life without any fear. Maybe the strong faith that I have also takes a lot of part in it. I'm not religious, but I would say that I have a very, very strong faith. I also believe that my faith saved me in a lot of ways. That voice that I heard, I think it is a miracle. It is my own miracle. Others may not believe it, but that is my truth. To me, you know, like now I live a life wherein what what may, whatever wherever life takes me, I know that I will triumph over any challenge that life would throw at me. So I'm not scared. I'm not scared to even, die a natural death. Like, because I know that I lived my life fully. I lived my life with meaning.
So beautiful, so beautiful. I mean, for listeners listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you probably cannot see Nicole's face, but no, not that she's crying or what. It's like she has so much light in her eyes as she's talking, as she's sharing. She really seems to be somebody who's really, really found her purpose, and she lives with such quiet conviction. At the same time, her heart is so huge, right? You can see it
Thank
shining
you.
through in the way she expresses herself.
Thank you.
Yeah, like you're very inspiring. Like your journey has been nothing short of inspiring. Like, yeah.
Sorry, heavy topic, but
No, you gotta be sorry. I think that was a beautiful, very, very well expressed. Like where now from here? Where do you go from here? Like what's exciting in your life? What you working towards?
what I'm working towards, I'm I think I was just having a conversation a few days ago and I was asked, like, you've achieved so much in your life. Where do you see yourself and what is still in store for you? And I said there are three things that I still dream of. Number one is to eventually be able to open my own practice. I love where I am now, and I absolutely adore my company. But I know that in the future, I also want to be able to give more and contribute more to not just organizations, but even individuals. May that be as an HR consultant or a speaker, a trainer, a coach, and whatnot. So that's still a forward plan for me in the coming years. Second is, I think I mentioned this prior to us being on air. I really want to be able to build my own charity or NGO. There are multiple causes that I've been active on over the years, one of which is for children with cancer. And I am an active volunteer and donor to the Philippine Children's Medical Center in the Philippines, and I make sure I visit and do something for them every year since I was 18. But I also want to be able to, again, give more. And even not just with children with cancer, but children's education. I come from a third world country wherein we still have a lot of children who don't have the privilege of being educated. There's so much potential that we can get from children, and if I can find a way to, educate more children, then I'd want to do that. I do help. I've helped like different a good number of children with their schooling already, but I think having my own charity will be able to impact more people. And then the third is to really have my own family. I think that's what we are going towards. At it's really more because while I am very much fulfilled with where I am in my career, I want to make sure that I'm doing things not just for myself, but for a bigger purpose, which is like really having my family. Because like if it's just me and if I grow old alone and everything, I what am I doing it for, right? So yeah, I think that's what's in store for me.
And also your Beatles collection, right?
Yeah, that
Yes,
one
yes.
too. Like
That one
really
too. Yeah, that one too, right? Your
getting into the Guinness Book of World Records.
and maybe one day having your own little like museum, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So we're almost coming to the end of this podcast. So I'll just end with a few quick fire questions.
Sure.
Just short answers to these questions, right? Are you ready for the quick fire round?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Even if you're not ready, I'm just going to fire anyway.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
I'm nervous.
Yeah, you're courageous. But you're nervous but courageous. Okay, great. The first question is this. What's the most powerful question you have ever been asked before?
Why are you doing what you are doing?
Beautiful. Beautiful question. Who is a mentor or supporter who has made the biggest difference in your life?
I've had a lot of mentors, but probably the most influential person in my life is my mom. She has guided me not just how I built my character as a person, but it's really even with my career. I just like idolize her a lot also. If people think I'm a good person, I think my mom is a saint.
Wow. She'll be very proud of you.
Thank you.
She'll be very proud of you. What's the most courageous thing you have done in your life that's made the biggest difference?
Maybe talking about my story. Again, it's not easy, but reliving my whole mental health journey and talking about it, it takes a lot of strength to do that,
Yeah, it
to
does.
open up such a vulnerable space in my life.
Yeah, it does. But you do it with so much grace right now.
Thank you.
You know somebody who has done the healing work and somebody who
Mm.
hasn't. Sometimes even when they are speaking, right, they are sharing personal story and they are breaking down and crying. I'm not saying that you cannot break down and cry, but it's like the way they are saying it is either they still haven't quite processed that emotion, they are still like living that emotion, they are still like having some form of incompletion around that. But I can see clearly that you have done a lot of inner work, that you're able to talk about that pain,
Yeah.
and I can feel the pain, but I can feel it from a perspective of wow, empathy, and feeling your pain and also knowing how far you have come, rather than just reliving it, because that can be quite re-traumatizing. Yeah, and I think you are very inspiring that way.
Thank you.
Brilliant. If our listeners would like to find out more about your work and what you do, where can they find you?
LinkedIn. Find that yellow girl on LinkedIn. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Nicole Golioso. That's the platform where I am most active at. It's where I also share a lot of my insights, not just with HR and inclusive leadership, but also about mental health and personal growth.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I'm sure that we'll put all this in our show notes.
Please.
And I hope you're going to have a lot more people connecting with you, as well as following your progress and your adventures through life. And I really am very inspired by this whole episode right now. It's like, wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being such a gift, and thank you for being you.
Thank you.